Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about executive employment agreements. So executive employment agreements often will be a little bit more lengthy, have a lot more to them than just your standard employment agreement. Don't always have to have an executive employment agreement in place, but often they will include a term of employment, certain guarantees to the executive, and often can be a really helpful tool to keep an executive in place, which is an important thing to a lot of companies and organizations because someone who's leading the organization can play a really big role in how things go and strategic vision and planning. So what are some things that employers should be thinking about when approaching whether they should have an executive employment agreement and what it should contain and how to go about it, Russell?
Yeah, well, to me, I think it starts with kind of like the standard things you would see in kind of your run-of-the-mill ordinary employment agreement from an employer standpoint. Things like restrictive covenants and confidentiality. Those types of agreements, provisions that you would typically want. If you want most employees to be subject to those, you're most likely going to want your executive team or your CEO or whoever it is to be subject to that as well. You're growing your business. You want to protect your business as it grows, and you don't want someone to be able to take your intellectual property, your confidential information, your proprietary information, your strategic plans, and then go work for a competitor or go solicit your customers, go do those sorts of things. So if that's all it was, we would just stop there and say, hey, everyone should have an employment agreement, and that would be the end of the conversation. But I think there's a little bit more in the context of executive agreements, and one reason that's the case is because I think, unlike your run-of-the-mill employee, executives probably have a little bit more leverage. So there's things that they may want or try to negotiate into an agreement. But there's also things from the employer side that you may want that, don't aren't a punishment or aren't a penalty or a limitation on the employee, but rather they're an incentive. So, from that standpoint, different types of compensation structures. Obviously, it's when I draft a standard employment agreement, I don't usually include compensation terms in it just because, we just want to put the restrictive covenants in here and we can handle, a basic salary or even a relatively straightforward bonus elsewhere. With executives, that can be a lot more complicated. And those bonus structures and incentive structures can tie towards the business objectives, overall, whether you're trying to grow, you're trying to prepare yourself for a sale, whether you actually want to accomplish a sale. There's all different types of incentive structures that can go into an executive agreement to help drive towards those goals.
Yeah, and another key piece to executive agreements will be around the term or the length of the agreement. So a lot of times the default for employees is going to be at will, so they can terminate their employment at any time. The employer can do the same, but there's a lot of reasons why a company or an organization will want to know what it will look like when the executive leaves and get enough notice from the executive, or that they might want to, lock in an executive for a certain term and motivate them to stay around and stay engaged with the company. So that's a big piece of these as well, and kind of figuring out the right way to set that term and set the terms so that they're incentivizing the executive to stay engaged, but also allowing enough outs that if something happened, a executive stole from the company or committed a crime, that they still would be able to get rid of the executive fairly easily in certain circumstances. But this also comes, to your point about leverage, this kind of comes with some give and take. If you're going to lock the executive in, they're going to want to, that you're going to give that same commitment. So if a company says, hey, I want you to serve at least 4 years with the company to work on through our strategic vision, the executive is going to say, well, I want you to commit that to me as well. And I want there to be some kind of consequence if the company just dumps me for no reason partway through just because they don't like what I'm doing, right? So there is a lot more negotiation that goes on around those terms and finding that balance of what makes sense and ensuring that you're protecting the company if something changes, but also that you're locking that executive into that period of time.
Yeah, well, and to that point, it also helps kind of roadmap an exit when that time comes, and ideally that's a ways down the way. And even if you do a term agreement, you can have renewal terms that can continue on. But when it comes time to separate, whether it's for retirement or because there's a sale, or for some other reason, it helps to have kind of, this is how we're going to unwind. This is how we're going to map things out. This is what you're entitled to. This is what you're not entitled to. And to have all that spelled out and agreed to up front.
Yeah, always good to when everyone's happy and in the beginning of the engagement's always the best time to sort out some of those details for sure. Well, thanks, Russell, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Sarah.